The clinking of glasses echoed through the elegant ballroom, as if every sound was meant to underline my mistake. My name is Caroline Moore, and this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. But I could already feel the heat climbing up my neck. Standing at the microphone, my sister Victoria, flawless in a champagne silk gown, smiled wide enough for the photographers, her voice coated in honey that stung like acid. "To my baby sister," she said, eyes shining as they swept across the room, "who has always chosen the simpler path. While the rest of us were busy chasing big dreams, Caroline found happiness in fields and small-town values, and today she marries a man who may not wear a suit to work, but certainly knows his way around a tractor." Laughter rolled like a wave across the room and landed squarely on my shoulders. I sat at the head table in my mother's old lace gown, my hands folded tightly in my lap, and I felt 200 eyes studying me, and the man sitting quietly by my side. Jackson's hand slid over mine, calloused fingers tracing slow, steady circles, and for a moment, that touch was the only thing tethering me to the ground. I glanced up at him and met the warm steadiness of his brown eyes, a calm so at odds with the polished crowd that surrounded us. Behind his calm, I could hear the low whisper of my parents at the table, my mother, Linda telling me to smile, my father Charles murmuring about how people were watching. Of course they were watching. They had always been watching, just waiting for proof that I didn't belong in their perfect world. I could feel Victoria feeding off the attention as she leaned toward the microphone again, elaborating about how proud she was to see me find contentment in a modest life, while gesturing toward the gleaming Manhattan attorney sitting beside her. Even the wedding toast was turned into a resume for her own success. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief, but I wasn't sure if it was because she was touched or embarrassed. I tried to swallow around the knot in my throat and sit taller, but the walls of the room seemed to close in, as if the chandeliers themselves were leaning down to get a better view of the family's black sheep. Every word out of Victoria's mouth felt like a carefully sharpened blade, slicing through my excitement and laying out the hierarchy for everyone present. The accomplished, shining older sister with her glossy husband, the proud parents who were already thinking of their next society event, and then me, the daughter who walked away from it all, to build a life with a man whose fingernails still held the faint trace of soil. I heard a murmur of conversation ripple as my sister lifted her glass to me once again. "To Caroline and Jackson," she said, "may your simple life be as sweet as you hope." Glasses clinked, smiles stretched, and as I raised my water glass, because champagne suddenly felt like too much, I couldn't shake the truth, pressing hard against my ribs. Even here, on my own wedding day, I was a guest at someone else's celebration. I still remember the first time I met Jackson Cole, long before the whispers and the judgment, before our wedding turned into a stage for family politics. It was the middle of summer, and I had driven down to Texas with a college friend who wanted to show me the farmer's market her cousin helped run. The air was heavy with heat, the kind that makes the asphalt shimmer, and the stalls were overflowing with peaches, sweet corn, and sunflowers in metal buckets. I noticed him right away, standing behind a table stacked with tomatoes so ripe they looked like they might burst. He wasn't trying to sell anyone anything. He just talked to people, calm and easy, like he had all the time in the world. I don't remember what I said first. Something awkward about how good the fruit smelled, but I remember how he smiled. Not the polished kind that comes from years of cocktail parties, but a genuine smile that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I was starving for. We talked for almost an hour that day, surrounded by the low hum of chatter and cicadas, and I learned that he had grown up on a farm his whole life, taking over after his father's heart attack when he was barely 20. Everything about him felt different from the world I had come from in Boston. No rush, no endless competition, no measuring self-worth by job titles or bank accounts. He asked about my life, and for the first time I found myself telling someone the truth instead of the version I'd been trained to present at family dinners. I told him how I'd grown tired of the polished surfaces and the hollow race for something I couldn't even name anymore. He told me about sunrises that stretched across the fields, about hard work that left him bone-tired and satisfied at the same time, about how there was dignity in growing something with your own hands. By the time the market was closing, he offered me a basket of peaches with an almost shy gesture, and I realized I didn't want the conversation to end. In the months that followed, I came back again and again, making excuses at first, then admitting to myself that I just wanted to see him. We built something slowly, without the frantic pace I was used to. Trust came first, a trust built on honesty and quiet gestures. The way he drove out to meet me halfway when I still lived in the city, the way he never made me feel small for wanting something different than the life my family had planned. My parents never understood why I kept going back to Texas, why the girl they raised in old brick streets and prep schools would choose a man who smelled of hay and earth. But standing in those fields beside him, my hair stuck to my neck in the heat. I felt more like myself than I ever had in any polished room full of people who thought they knew what was best for me. 3 years later, the sound of laughter and the smell of catered barbecue hit me the moment Jackson and I stepped into the manicured backyard of Victoria and Bradley's house in Winnetka, one of those Chicago suburbs where the hedges are clipped into perfect shapes, and even the sidewalks look polished. The grass was too green to be real, and white tents had been set up over long tables covered in linen. In my hands was a simple glass dish covered in foil, the green bean casserole I had made that morning, with vegetables from our own garden. Before I could even set it down, Victoria was already gliding toward us in a sundress that probably cost more than a month of groceries. Her eyes flicked to the dish, like it was something questionable left on her front porch. "Oh," she said, in a voice dripping with that same sweetness she'd used at my wedding. "You brought food. How quaint." Bradley appeared right behind her with a drink in his hand, and a smirk that made it clear what he thought of our contribution. "Let me guess," he said. "Homegrown." I nodded once, and he chuckled like that was a punchline. We made our way to the buffet table, and I placed the dish down beside a spread of food that had clearly been prepared by professionals. I could feel the stares as we walked. People didn't say anything outright, but there's a certain kind of silence that speaks just as loud as words. My father Charles arrived then, bourbon glass in hand, his silver hair and tailored shirt, making him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. "I see you're keeping busy with the farming," he said, the word farming stretching out, like it tasted bad in his mouth. My mother Linda hovered behind him, smiling in that polite, tight way that says she's trying not to look uncomfortable, but failing. "We were just telling everyone about Victoria's trip to Paris," she said, as if that was somehow relevant to me. Jackson, patient as ever, simply nodded and said nothing, though I could feel the tension in the way his fingers brushed against my arm. Every conversation was a reminder of the unspoken ranking in this family, the same one I had felt on my wedding day. Later, when the plates were full and people had found places to sit, Victoria stood in the center of a circle of neighbors and family, like a hostess on a stage. She was telling a story about the latest deal Bradley had closed, a number so big it made the listeners murmur appreciatively. When her eyes landed on me, she smiled again, that sharp kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. "How's life on the farm, Caroline? Still playing in the dirt?" she asked, and the group around her laughed. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. Jackson's hand found mine under the table, steady as a rock. "We're doing well," I said quietly. I don't know if anyone even heard me over the sound of their laughter, but in that moment I realized nothing had changed. 3 years had passed, and I was still the girl they were all waiting to see stumble. As the afternoon stretched on, and the sun softened behind the tall maples in the backyard, the laughter and clinking glasses drifted toward the pool house, where I had stepped away to catch my breath. The crowd was still thick around Victoria, her bright white dress and perfect smile, like a beacon for everyone who came to pay their respects to her curated life. I stood by the railing, pretending to admire the water, when I heard someone approach. It was my younger brother Ethan, looking far less polished than the rest, in a rumpled shirt, and with that restless way he'd always had, like he wished he could disappear. He handed me a glass of lemonade and stood next to me without saying a word for a moment. "You holding up?" he finally asked, eyes flicking toward where Jackson was still at our table, politely enduring another round of condescension from Bradley. "I'm fine," I said, though it was obvious from the tightness in my voice that I wasn't. Ethan sighed, leaning on the railing. "It's getting worse, huh? They don't even try to hide it anymore." I glanced at him, surprised by his tone. He had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth things over. Today, though, he sounded tired. When I didn't answer, he let out another slow breath and stared at the glass in his hand. "Look, I probably shouldn't be saying anything," he said finally, "but you should know things aren't going so great for Bradley right now." My eyebrows lifted slightly, but I stayed quiet, waiting. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Some of his big investments tanked. Badly. Like, really badly. He's been scrambling to hold things together, but from what I hear, they're drowning. The house, the trips, the cars. It's all hanging on by a thread. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had never imagined hearing that word associated with Victoria. Drowning. "They don't want anyone to know, of course," Ethan added, "but I figured you should be aware. You're going to start noticing cracks if you pay attention." I stared at the rippling water, letting his words sink in. A kind of quiet settled over me that had nothing to do with the noise of the party behind us. I thought back to every sharp comment, every little jab, every time I'd been made to feel small, and I wondered what it felt like to have a life built so carefully around appearances suddenly start to crumble. Ethan straightened, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Just watch your back. When they run out of options, they're going to start looking at you and Jackson. You've got land. You've got something solid. Don't think for a second they won't try." He gave me a faint, apologetic smile before slipping away, leaving me with the glass of lemonade and a swirl of thoughts I couldn't shake. When I walked back toward the tent, I saw Victoria laughing too loudly, Bradley's jaw tight as he sipped his drink, and for the first time, I felt a small flicker of understanding. They were afraid, and deep down, I knew that fear would eventually come knocking at our door. The call came on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when the fields looked washed out, and even the air felt heavy. I recognized my mother's voice the second I answered, soft but clipped in that way she used when something unpleasant was coming. "Caroline, we need you and Jackson to come by the house this weekend," she said, skipping over any pretense of small talk. "There's something we need to discuss as a family." Those words made my stomach tighten. Growing up, as a family, never meant birthdays or good news. It meant judgment, expectation, decisions that had already been made without me. I hung up and looked at Jackson, who was standing by the window drying his hands on a dish towel, watching my face like he could read every word. "Family meeting," I said. He didn't ask what it was about. He already knew. That Saturday we drove into the neighborhood where I'd grown up. The streets lined with big houses that all looked the same, as if they were built to keep the world out. My parents' house stood as polished as ever, but I noticed for the first time that the shutters needed paint, the flower beds were empty, and the lawn wasn't quite as green as I remembered. Inside, the air felt stale, as if the whole house was holding its breath. Everyone was already there, seated like a jury. My parents sat on the sofa, Victoria perched on the armchair, Bradley standing near the window with his hands buried in his pockets. Only Ethan looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Slouched on the ottoman with his gaze fixed on the floor, Jackson and I were directed to sit in the 2 chairs opposite them, positioned perfectly in the center of the room. My father cleared his throat, his voice heavy. "You know things have been challenging for the family lately," he began. Bradley's jaw tightened, and Victoria kept her smile pinned in place, as though it was glued there. "We need to be honest," my mother added, twisting her wedding ring. "We could lose everything. The house, the savings, all of it. And we need your help." There was a long pause where the weight of their expectations settled over the room like dust. Finally, my father leaned forward. "The farm," he said plainly. "If you sold it, we could pay off the debts. It's the only real asset the family has left." I stared at him, then at Victoria's perfectly composed face, then at Bradley, who couldn't even look at me. "You're asking us to sell our home," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "To fix mistakes we didn't make." "This isn't about blame," Bradley said, his voice rising. "This is about family. We need you to do the right thing." My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father's tone hardened. "We need an answer soon. There isn't much time." Jackson's hand closed over mine like a vice. In that moment, with everyone watching, I realized this wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum, and they all expected us to bow our heads and give them everything. For a long moment I just sat there, staring at them, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Then I felt Jackson's thumb move against the back of my hand, slow and steady, grounding me. I took a deep breath and said, as evenly as I could, "We're not selling." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. My father blinked as if he hadn't heard me correctly. "Caroline," he said, leaning forward, "you don't understand. This isn't just about us. It's about all of us. Without that money, everything we've built as a family is gone." I looked at him and shook my head. "You mean everything you built without me, everything I was never part of." Bradley pushed away from the window then, pacing like a man who could barely keep his anger under control. "Don't make this about some childhood grudge," he said. "This is life and death for us. And you're sitting on land you barely know how to use." My voice sharpened before I could stop it. "That land is our life. We've put everything into it. We work it every single day. And we're not giving it up, so you can patch over your bad decisions." Victoria stood up suddenly, her composure cracking. "Do you think this is easy for me?" she said, her voice rising. "Do you think I want to come here and beg you for help? I am trying to save this family, Caroline, and you're acting like you're better than us because you decided to run off and play farmer." My mother's hands twisted in her lap. her voice trembling as she tried to cut in. "Please, honey, don't do this. We are running out of time. If you don't do something, we could lose the house." I looked at her, feeling the sting of every year I had sat in that same house and listened to them talk about how much more Victoria was, how much better. "And where were you?" I asked softly. "When I needed family." No one spoke. Even Ethan looked up, his eyes wide. I turned to Bradley. "You spent years laughing at Jackson, years looking down on us like we were less. And now you want the very thing you mocked to save you?" Bradley's face flushed deep red. "You don't understand what's at stake. There are real consequences here." "Exactly," Jackson said, his voice calm but firm. It was the first time he had spoken since we sat down. "There are real consequences to choices, and the choices you made are not ours to fix." He stood, and so did I. Victoria's voice followed us, shrill with anger. "If you walk out that door without agreeing, don't expect us to forgive you. You'll regret this. Don't think you can turn your back on your own family and come running back when you need something." My father's words were lower, colder. "If you're not with us, you're against us. Think about what that means." Jackson opened the front door, and the cool air hit my face like water. As we stepped out into the fading light, I realized the line between us had been drawn, and this time there was no going back. The drive home that evening was silent except for the hum of the tires on the road, both of us wrapped in the kind of anger that doesn't need words. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked almost golden in the last stretch of sunlight, the fields beyond it swaying like they were trying to remind me of what we had built. Jackson shut off the engine but didn't move, his hands still gripping the wheel. "Come with me," he said quietly. I followed him to the barn, confused, and watched as he unlocked the small office in the back that I had seen 100 times but never paid much attention to. He knelt at a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder, setting it on the desk. "There's something I should have shown you a long time ago," he said. The folder opened and out came pages covered with official seals, diagrams and numbers that barely made sense to me at first. He handed me one sheet, and when I looked closer, I realized it was a patent. "This," he said, pointing, "is for the irrigation system we've been using on the South Fields, the one I designed from scratch 3 years ago. It's been licensed across 4 states." I looked from the patent to him, stunned, as he pulled out another document. "And this one," he continued, "is for the soil analysis software I developed last year. It tells farmers exactly when to plant and how to use less water without losing yield. We're using it here every day. And this," he added, showing me yet another document, "is a provisional patent for a new drone system that's going into trials this fall. There were dozens of them, each one tied to the land I thought was just a farm. Caroline," he said softly, "this isn't just a farm. It hasn't been for a long time. It's the heart of a company I started 5 years ago, Coal Agritech." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "How big?" I whispered. Jackson slid a financial statement across the table. The number at the bottom made my breath catch in my throat. "We're valued at more than 50 million, he said, quietly. "We've kept it off the radar because I wanted to build something real, before anyone could try to take it away." I sank into a chair, still holding the patent papers, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "I wanted to see who we were to them when they thought we had nothing. And now we know." Then he opened another folder, this one containing printouts of stock trades and company reports. "And there's more," he said. "Bradley's firm? They've been shorting our company for years. They bet millions on Coal Agritech failing. That's where their money went. He lost it all betting against us." I stared at him, the truth washing over me like a cold wave. The same people who mocked us, who called us simple and small, had gambled everything on our failure. And now, they were drowning in the consequences. They came the very next afternoon, 3 cars pulling up our long gravel drive and stopping in a cloud of dust that drifted over the fields like smoke. I stood at the kitchen window and watched them get out, every movement sharp and purposeful. My father in his pressed shirt, my mother with her handbag clutched like a lifeline, Victoria with a leather folder tucked under her arm, and Bradley already pulling papers from a briefcase, as if the matter had been decided before they even arrived. They didn't knock so much as pound, and when I opened the door, my father simply said, "We need to talk," like this was still his house, and we were still children. They filed into the living room without waiting to be invited, and Bradley laid the papers on our coffee table, pages already marked with sticky notes. "We have a buyer lined up," he said, his voice clipped, "and these are the contracts. You sign, the land sells, and we all move forward." My mother added softly, "This is the only way to save everyone." I didn't move to sit, and neither did Jackson. Instead, he crossed the room calmly, pulled a folder from the desk in the corner, and laid it down next to Bradley's papers. "What's this supposed to be?" Victoria asked, narrowing her eyes. Jackson opened the folder and spread out documents, patent numbers, and financial statements sliding across the table. "This," he said evenly, "is what you've all been looking down on. Coal Agritech. The company you thought was just dirt under our boots." For the first time since they arrived, no one spoke. My father frowned, scanning the pages. "I don't understand," he said. "You will," Jackson replied. "These patents, these systems, they were developed here, on this farm. We're not barely getting by. We're running a company that's worth more than $50 million and growing. And Bradley," his voice sharpened, "your bets against us are exactly why you're in the hole right now. You didn't just lose your own money. You lost theirs." He looked directly at my parents. "Every dollar you invested with him was wagered on the hope that we would fail." Bradley went pale, his mouth opening but no words coming out. At that moment, the front door opened, and Leonard Wise, our attorney, walked in, his briefcase swinging lightly at his side. "I'm here because my clients asked me to make something clear," he said, as he set out legal documents that dwarfed the sale papers Bradley had brought. In a calm, steady voice, Leonard explained that the farm was fully owned by Coal Agritech, protected under multiple state and federal laws, and that no forced sale could be made under any circumstances. Then, he looked each of them in the eye. "You have no legal leverage here," he said, "and after the way you've treated them, you have no moral leverage either. This meeting is over." They sat there, speechless, as the truth finally sank in. Everything they thought they could take from us had already slipped through their fingers. For a long moment, no one spoke. The papers lay between us, and in the silence, I heard the creak of the old floorboards under my feet, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, even the wind pushing against the walls of the house that we built ourselves. Then I felt something rise in me, something that had been buried for years, and I stepped forward. "Do you know what it has been like?" I said, my voice low and steady. "To spend my whole life being told I was less, every time I came to this house, every dinner, every holiday. You made it clear that I was the one who didn't belong. You laughed at my choices. You mocked the man I love. You turned my wedding into a chance to make a speech about everything I wasn't, and I took it. I swallowed it, because I thought maybe one day it would be different. Maybe one day I'd be enough for you. But here we are, and the only reason you're sitting in my living room is because suddenly you need something from me. My mother tried to speak, but I held up my hand. No, you don't get to interrupt me this time. You spent years looking down on me and Jackson, pretending our lives were small because it made you feel big, and now you want to use the very life you mocked to save yourselves. Do you have any idea how insulting that is? You didn't care about us when you thought we had nothing. You didn't care when you saw me working dawn to dusk in the dirt, building something with my own hands. You cared about one thing: control, and you lost it. You want to talk about family? Family doesn't make their own feel small, just to make themselves look taller. Family doesn't sit around at holidays whispering like you're a charity case. Family doesn't show up with legal papers and threats because their perfect world came crashing down. That isn't family. That's opportunism wrapped in blood ties. Victoria's eyes were wet now, but I didn't stop. You asked me once if I ever wondered what I could have been if I hadn't settled, and here's your answer. I became someone without you, without your approval, without your help, without 1 ounce of support from any of you, and I am proud of the life we built. It's not yours. You don't get to touch it. I turned to the door and opened it wide, the cold air rushing in like a release. You can leave now, I said, my voice quiet but unshaking. Take your contracts, your threats, and your pity, and leave. There is nothing for you here anymore. One by one they stood, faces pale and strained, and as they walked past me and out into the driveway, I felt a weight lifting, years of humiliation and doubt finally leaving with them. When the last car pulled away, all that was left was the wind, the fields, and a silence that felt like freedom. When the sound of their engines finally faded down the gravel road, the house felt different, like someone had opened a window and let the air move again. I stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the empty driveway, the tracks their cars had left in the dust, already softening under the wind. Jackson came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin lightly on my shoulder. Neither of us said anything as we closed the door and walked back into the living room, where the table was still scattered with papers. I gathered them slowly, one by one, the contracts they'd brought, the proof of what we had built, and I felt the tension start to drain from my hands. Outside, the sun was beginning to sink low across the fields, and the golden light poured in through the windows, as if to remind us that everything we needed was already here. Later, after the last dishes had been cleared and Leonard had gone, Jackson and I carried 2 chairs out onto the porch and sat side by side, looking out over the land that stretched for miles in every direction. The fields were quiet, the first stars beginning to prick through the soft blue sky, and for the first time in months, there was no weight pressing on my chest. "You all right?" he asked after a long silence. I nodded, leaning against him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath. "I didn't realize," I said slowly, "how much space they took up in my head until just now. It feels lighter." He reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing the same circles he had drawn on my palm 3 years ago at our wedding. "We're done letting them decide who we are," he said. "That ends today." I turned my head and looked at him, and in that quiet moment, I understood what freedom felt like. It wasn't just the absence of their demands. It was the certainty of choosing our own life. We sat there as the sky darkened, listening to the crickets start their nightly song, watching the fireflies flicker at the edge of the fields. For once, there was no noise in my mind, no measuring myself against what they wanted me to be. Everything around me, the worn wood of the porch, the smell of the earth cooling after a hot day, the man beside me who had believed in me long before I learned to believe in myself, was enough. More than enough. "Do you think they'll come back?" I asked finally. Jackson gave a small shrug. "Maybe. But next time, they'll know who they're talking to." I smiled at that. A small, quiet smile, and let my head rest against his shoulder. Out there under the wide open sky, with nothing but the hum of the summer night around us, I realized I was exactly where I was meant to be. The letter came 2 weeks later on an ordinary morning, the kind that begins with the smell of coffee and the sound of the barn doors creaking open. It was from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, printed on thick paper with an official seal, and I read the words twice just to be sure they were real. They were offering a multi-million-dollar grant to expand coal agritech's research into drought-resistant crops and advanced irrigation systems, work that had already been quietly spreading from our fields to farms across the Midwest. Jackson stood next to me as I held the letter in both hands, my fingers trembling, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. All I could think about was how this started. A small patch of land, a stubborn belief in doing things differently, and a dream everyone else dismissed. And now there was someone outside of us, outside of this farm, who believed too. Jackson smiled, that slow, steady smile I loved so much, and said, "Looks like we've got work to do." That afternoon, we walked the fields together to talk about what came next. The winter cover crops were still in the ground, the soil rich and dark, and I could already picture where the new test plots would go, where the drones would fly, where the small ideas we had nurtured would grow into something bigger than either of us imagined. We talked about the new equipment, about hiring more people from around here, about turning what we'd built into something that could reach places where water was scarce and soil was dying. And with every step, I felt the weight of the past sliding further behind me, replaced by something else entirely, a purpose that had nothing to do with proving ourselves to anyone. "We're not just building a company," Jackson said, picking up a handful of earth and letting it run through his fingers. "We're building something that can help people eat, that can change lives." It wasn't pride in his voice. It was something quieter, steadier, a vision. By the time the sun began to sink, painting the fields in orange and pink, we had circled back to the porch. We paused there, looking out at the wide land that had given us everything, and for a moment the future seemed as open as the sky above us. I slipped my hand into his, and together we stepped into the field again, walking side by side with the light at our backs. There was no audience here, no judgment, no one to tell us what we could or couldn't be, just the two of us, the hum of insects, the smell of the earth, and the certainty that what we were building mattered. "One step at a time," Jackson said softly, as the last of the sun dipped below the horizon. I looked out at the rows stretching ahead of us and nodded. This was where it all began, and this was where we would change the world.